And we are doing a Touchstone Chats this month, raising awareness for domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And with me are Christine and Angela from Domestic Violence Services here in Lancaster County with Community Action Partnership. Welcome, Christine and Angela.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So we want to talk a little bit about the intersection and relationships between domestic violence and mental health, and especially to help support people in our community who may be looking for resources and help around domestic violence and their mental health. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to go ahead and get started because I know we want to get right into it. So,
Anna, is there a way for me to put our 24-hour hotline and text line number in a chat somewhere?
Sure. Yeah. I think you can just click comments and it should just go right in. So that's great. That's a wonderful resource, and we'll add that. We'll get that added for you.
Okay.
So either Christine or Angela, whoever wants to jump in, what is the definition of domestic violence? What do we mean when we say domestic violence?
Angela, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we usually define domestic violence as a pattern of behaviors of all different types that one individual uses to establish and maintain power and control over another individual usually in an intimate relationship, although sometimes the definition is broadened to encompass family violence and other relationships. But typically what we're working with at DVS are current and former intimate partner relationships. So it is that pattern of behaviors, whatever they are. They could be physically violent behaviors. They could be emotional and psychological abuse. It could be financial tactics. There's a broad range of what sexual abuse. There's a broad range of what those tactics could look like. And typically a person who's abusive will use whatever combination of those tactics or methods that works or suits in their situation to keep that partner under their control. But there's that power and control element in the relationship, which sets it apart from, say, an unhealthy relationship or a relationship that's not abusive but maybe isn't healthy or maybe needs work. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much. For young people who are maybe dating or in a relationship, what are some warning signs that they may want to know about to help identify when a relationship might be heading in that direction of an unhealthy situation with the power and control that you talked about? Either one of you. Thinking about the teens young people that we work with.
So when I talk with teenagers, one of the things, that I set up for them is, think about like a new relationship generally. They're spending lots of time together. Then one of the partners wants to spend all of their time together. So they're texting you all of the time. Hey, where are you? Hey, what's going on? Hey, I saw you talking to so-and-so, right? So they're constantly wanting to spend and dominate all of that other person's free time. And so that's kind of a yellow flag, right? That's a warning sign that we need to have some healthy boundaries here. Like, I'm still me and I still have my social group and my school activities, and you should have the same because that's why we like each other, right? Like, you are a whole person and I am a whole person. But we get caught up with that, right? Like when somebody's showering us with attention and, they just want to spend all of their time with us. We kind of think that's romantic. Like, that's what we've been sold. And our friends might be selling that same line. Oh, well, you're so lucky. They want to, you shouldn't be complaining that they want to spend time with you, or, that they're constantly checking in on you. But the constantly checking in on you can be checking up on you. Well, what are you doing? Well, why aren't you home? Well, you didn't tell me you were going out with them, right? And now I need to ask permission to go out with my friends or to change my plans, right? So some of those sorts of things can be yellow, red flags. It depends on what the other types of behavior might be that are engaged. One of the things that we talk a lot about is social media, and not handing off passwords and things like that, because when somebody has access to your accounts, then they can get inside. They can be checking your email. They can be checking all of your social media. Like, they can be on the inside now. And so to hand that off to a partner could be extremely dangerous. And we've seen how even with some of the teen bullying situations, right? Like if there's a breakup and it goes bad, they still have control or access to all of their connection to the outside world, their social media, their electronic communication. And we see that a lot with adult populations as well. There's technology that they can use to take control of their phones, to put GPS trackings into their devices, usually a cell phone of some sort, into their computers. And that can get really dangerous because now they know where they are at all times of the day. And most of us don't know how to look for those things. I mean, I still don't know how to look for those things. But if I hear it coming up in a victim's story, like what they're telling me, then that's the path we go down and try and figure out like what might have happened.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful. And yeah, having healthy boundaries and safety in a relationship is really key and crucial. And I think it's especially important now with teens and social media and recognizing, some of those early warning signs with text messages, social, and all of it.
So just two more things that I heard that recently we, different people have reached out and like shared some of their stories just, behind the scenes. Two of the other things that really start to come up for me and seem to be a thread between the stories is that, they were caught off guard because they didn't have a lot of relationship or dating experience, right, which is expected, right? They're teenagers. Yeah. And the other thing is that they were afraid to tell their parents. They weren't talking to their parents about what was going on in their relationship, to the point that when the physical abuse started, that they were making excuses to their parents. They were afraid to tell their parents for support. They were trying to protect their parents in some way, I guess, from what was going on inside of their relationship, or not wanting to disappoint their parents, maybe. So I think, having those really open dialogues, and it has to start before they're dating, right? And we actually have a handout that we take with us. We created it in the spring about how to have conversations with children of all ages, starting from preschool on up, about healthy relationships, because that's where you start to learn those relationship patterns at young ages. And if I as a child am having those conversations with my parents at a young age, I know that I can continue to have that conversation as I grow.
Yeah, I was also thinking about young people who, for whatever reason, can't confide in their parents. There could be other reasons why. Maybe it's not safe,
right,
to confide in their parents. And the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, Angela, was sexual coercion to engage in sexual activity. A lot of what's happening, or what the flags are what you're describing, the things you're describing. But there's also the pressure to have sex or engage in sexual activity, which gets disguised as, again, another way that the relationship is maybe accelerating too quickly. But that pressure to engage, that might be something that would be especially hard to talk with your parents about, depending on what that relationship is like. but teens often haven't yet formed, even though we're in a, it's a lot different from when I was a teenager, say, but maybe they still haven't formed those sort of boundaries or expectations around what, if any, sexual activity is going to occur in this relationship. And that can be, if you loved me, you would do this, that I think that can be a really powerful red flag as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. So, why is awareness important? I mean, we're talking about awareness. Just now we're talking about understanding warning signs. Why is it so important?
Well, I can give you one quick example that I was thinking about when Angela was talking about teens and warning signs. When I grew up in the 70s and early 80s, we didn't talk about domestic violence, teen dating. We didn't talk about any of those things. So some of those things were happening to me, to my friends, to other people that we knew. We didn't have any language for it. We weren't getting any education on it. People weren't talking about it. And that's really confused. So then you're really confused. Is this normal behavior or not? So I think one of the reasons why awareness is so important is just to put it out there as something that this is something that we need to be talking about. This is something that we need to be aware of because so many people are impacted by it. And maybe it helps folks to be able to sort through and figure out what to do or where to seek help if things are happening to them.
Yeah. I mean, what we grow up with is what we all know is normal, right? And then once we get out into the world and start having exposure to other people and other types of relationships, we might figure some of that out. I think it's also important for an awareness month is to educate folks, educate parents and caregivers and other people who would be interacting with those young people to be able to pick up on the signs or even just create a safe space. I was talking with a pastor and they wanted to know like what they can do in their church. It's the same thing that a teacher could do in a classroom or a principal could do in a school building, is like making this a place where people know that we're going to have these conversations and that there are safe people here for you to talk to about those conversations, that we're not going to shy away from it. And if you're unsafe, if you need help, that we're going to figure out how to help you do that. I think, it serves a dual purpose to let people know like these are the expectations. And also if something bad is happening, let us help you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So with my daughter as a parent, one of the things that I often a saying that I repeat a lot in our family is that we don't keep secrets in our family. We don't, it's a safe place to talk about anything. And that's often been a really great opening for, her to bring up challenges or difficult conversations or, and she's 8, so it's she's still pretty young, but it's not too soon to kind of establish some of those boundaries. I appreciate that you mentioned, teachers and other communities where adults are mandated reporters or, trained to know when a child might disclose something that is happening to them, that they know that which adults in their lives are safe people to talk to about those things. So maybe could you elaborate a little bit on that, in terms of guidance or support or recommendations for parents to kind of start teaching our children about, what are some of the things that families can do to help keep our kids safe?
I think one of the things I would say is start young. Don't wait until magically now they're a teenager and they have a partner and you're like, how did this happen? And, teach them, I think working in this field, both Christine and I have worked in the domestic violence and sexual assault field for 20 years or more. So just having those conversations at a young age and then growing the conversation with them as the child continues to develop and grow, and that sort of thing. So when they're young, it can be just talking about empowering them to be able to say no and set boundaries, right? And what that means. So if you're playing around and the child says no, you stop. You said no, I'm going to respect that, right? Like, and start to teach them the power that they have of no and consent to activities. I think those are some of the things that are important to talking about. Family values in relationships can be really helpful. And I think that that's a conversation that starts at a young age and continues to grow. When I worked at an agency where we were focused on conflict resolution, resolving conflict in front of the children. So, we often, I can think of times when I thought about my parents arguing or something like that, but didn't necessarily see how it was resolved. And so I think that's important, is to talk with your children about resolving conflict and modeling that process for them so that they can see what hopefully healthy conflict resolution looks like, because we're going to encounter conflict throughout our lives. So let's start teaching them at a young age also how to resolve that. Those are some of the suggestions that I would make. Christine, did you want to add anything?
Just that I think it starts with all of the relationships that we have, and you kind of said that, but for younger children, it's the friendships they're making at school, it's the other, it says even before school, right? My grandchildren are in preschool and they're at childcare. So if you start off with the sort of idea or expectation that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, as Angela said, there are going to be inevitable conflicts or disagreements, but we resolve them. We sort of have a code about how we interact with other people. And then why would that not extend then to our intimate relationships as we get to that point? When we get older, we don't treat those differently, even though sometimes that's what happens. We do treat them differently, but I think if we establish that foundation of respect for others, people, animals, all the beings that we come in contact with, and then that extends to, the most cherished relationships we have with our intimate relationships, and those with our family and closest friends.
Thank you so much. So, our mission here at Touchstone Foundation is youth mental wellness, and we do a lot of work with focused on teens and young people and families. So, children's mental health is kind of the key to everything that we're doing. So, with an understanding of domestic violence, what are the mental health implications? What should we know about? What should our audience know about in terms of understanding domestic violence and the impact that it has on somebody's mental health?
We do see a high co-occurrence of this. I think I would suspect that many of the folks we work with, many of the victims and survivors we're working with, may not have an official diagnosis, right? In part because sometimes medical practitioners are just treating symptoms instead of putting all of the pieces together. And, we know that disclosures to medical professionals sometimes flies under the radar as well. Mm-hmm. Some of the stats, I had one of our colleagues, we have a medical systems advocate here on staff at DVS. We're really happy to have her, and she pulled some statistics. So survivors of domestic violence are 3 times more likely to meet the criteria for PTSD. And so, there's a really kind of strong criteria for that. But having lived in chronic violence, uncertainty, trauma-filled environments can lead to PTSD. Survivors of domestic violence are 3 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts and 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. So, when you think about that feeling Anna, you and I do trauma trainings together.
Yes.
The definition of trauma is hopelessness, helplessness, and fear for life or safety.
It's all of those.
Right. It literally is like it's in their home, and it's with a person. The source of it is a person who says that they love them or claims that they love them, and even shows periods of time where it does feel like love, right? Like that's the whole mind craziness of it, is that sometimes they see Hyde and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like sometimes they see the really loving, caring person, and then it gets infused with the abuse that's in the relationship, the control. So not feeling like they have a way out, or maybe connection to services or support. Maybe their family has already been cut off from them, their friends, because that's a tactic that the abusers often use, is to isolate them. Once that isolation sets in, then I could imagine that's the path that they might consider. We also know that survivors are 6 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder. So we do some work with Gatehouse locally and providing information and support to their folks. And so when somebody is struggling with somebody, with something hard, with something difficult, with the abuse, they might turn to something to take away that emotional pain temporarily. I'm sure that you have these conversations with folks all of the time, and this is part of what you do. Finding other ways to self-soothe, and to deal with the emotional struggle that they might be going through. So, the increased use of substances, alcohol, drugs to just numb that pain, could be part of it. Sometimes I was talking with some of my colleagues about a group that we're preparing for, and sometimes the abuser is using drugs or alcohol as part of the abuse, forcing them to use, increasing their usage. Like that sometimes gets tangled up in the relationship as well. And we've heard that in the groups that we run.
Thank you. So last evening, I had the opportunity to hear Stephanie Land with our partners, our friends and colleagues at Milagro House. She's the author of the book Made. It's her memoir about escaping a domestic violence situation with her child. And I think often, we sort of think of women and children in these situations of domestic violence, but earlier in the day yesterday, we also hosted a continuing medical education series about how to support the mental health of LGBTQ people. And it's not only heterosexual relationships, it's not only women and children. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about what some of the demographics and what do we see here in Lancaster County are the populations that you're serving? It's one of those things that unfortunately has no race or ethnicity or income level. Is that still true here in Lancaster County as well?
It's a big question.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I would say that demographically, the individuals we serve do mirror to some extent the demographics in the county. However, individuals who use our shelter services tend to be more often women of color and individuals from other more marginalized groups who, combined with being a victim or survivor of domestic violence, also have additional barriers to seeking help, additional barriers to thriving on their own or self-sufficient, economic stability is what I want to say, not self-sufficiency. So it's complex, but I would say that the LGBTQ plus community, which experiences violence at the same, if not higher rate than the heterosexual community, is not represented as much in the individuals we serve, probably because there are real and perceived barriers to seeking those services. So there are just additional challenges, additional barriers. And that's something that we're doing a lot of work to try to overcome. And we need to do more work to try to overcome, because domestic violence organizations have traditionally been more mainstream organizations. We do serve overwhelmingly women, although I would say that in our legal center, a higher percentage of men seeking protection orders, or male identified individuals seeking protection orders, than say in our shelter. So in some sense, it matters whether it's a residential service or other services that we offer. So it's complex, but I would say that just as with most other organizations, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on our part in terms of doing more of that specific outreach to groups of individuals who need our services, or need access to services, but may not think that we provide them in a manner that's going to work for them, or in a manner that's, humble and takes into account all of the additional challenges that they're facing. I hope that made sense. It seemed like a ramble, but we're working hard on it, but there are a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed, and we're trying to be part of that movement and that solution as well.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, because I think it's important for us to kind of maybe dispel some of those myths that, we tend to just sort of think that it's this, population of women and children, but it's much bigger than that. It's much more expansive and beyond that, and, exists in all kinds of relationships, and many different people can be victims of domestic violence. So I think that's just helpful for people to remember and understand, and good to know that services are available for anyone who is experiencing domestic violence. So to that end, how can we support people in our lives who, whether they're children, young adults, teens, older people who, are in our lives, if we're concerned about them? I remember years ago, I was facilitating a support group, and I was concerned about a mother and her young child. And, I was working with her for a long, long time, over months, and eventually sent her the wheel of power and control. We looked at it, and we talked about, what kinds of relationship dynamics she was experiencing. And then, I did ultimately encourage her to contact domestic violence services, because it was a financial power dynamic that she was mainly experiencing. So there are these kinds of, things that we often, again, sort of think about that physical violence as sort of our rudimentary definition of domestic violence, but that's not, you said earlier, that's not the only type of power and control that an abuser can take in a unhealthy relationship. So what can we do to support people in our lives who are looking for support from us? If we are the safe person that they're disclosing to, or we care about them and they're coming to us, what can we do?
Well, I'm sure Angela will weigh in here as well, but I just saw a meme this morning. I was just scrolling through Facebook. There are a lot of domestic violence organizations across the state posting different tips and things for the public to get involved. One thing we can do is what you already did. You're educated about domestic violence. You know what the resources are. You're offering those resources to folks, but believe what people tell you. Believe what the person tells you. Be aware that you may be the first person they're telling. So, there's a lot of respect and weight for that sharing that's happening in that moment. I think it would behoove all of us to know what the resources are around domestic violence, just as we would know what the resources are around other issues that are friends and family members might commonly be experiencing so that we can offer that information and just know that it's going to be a journey. I mean, someone isn't likely telling you what's happening and then, boom, they're ready to do something about it or end the relationship the next day. It could be a conversation that needs to happen over a period of time. Let that person know that you're supportive and non-judgmental, no matter what stuff's coming up for you in your head as they're telling you their story. It's their story. They're in it. Support them, believe what they're saying, know what the resources are, let them know it's not their fault. They're not alone. Message. Sometimes it's as simple as messages like that. And then you can go further in terms of knowing what the resources are and making sure that you're ready to be able to provide that information or make those connections for folks. What else, Angela? I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really powerful, because for them, often the abuser does not show the abusive side of themselves to the rest of the public, right?
Right.
And so for a victim to come forward and say, this person who presents in all of these other positive ways, and having everybody say, I just can't believe that. That doesn't seem like their nature, right? That's the word, like, no. I mean, we ourselves might be surprised by that, but the victim is reaching out for some assistance when they disclose that. And so to be able to just, as Christine said, say, I believe you, and I'm here to, I'll support you. I'll help you figure some of this out. Knowing about the 24-hour hotline and text line. And it's important for people to know. So Anna, if you have a friend who discloses to you and you want to know what you can do to support that person, you could reach out to the hotline
Right.
and talk with somebody and learn more about how to be a good support person, right? Because maybe they're not ready to talk to one of us, but they'll talk to you. And so you might be able to help support them until they garner that courage to reach out for services themselves. So for all of us to be able to recognize those signs, and if you're concerned about a friend, if there's a way that you can maybe even open the door to the conversation. Hey, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Did you see this on Facebook? Or, I attended this event this month. Have you ever encountered, just start the conversation. Have you ever encountered anybody who's experienced relationship abuse? Or, how do you feel in your relationship? Do you feel safe in your relationship? And maybe start a conversation that way. Those sorts of things can be helpful. Reading the book and, having attended this, the Stephanie Land conversation last night, like that was really powerful too. So knowing where the resources are, and also, and one of the ways to encourage folks perhaps might be, I want to support you, but I'm not the expert on this. These folks are trained. Like, we have 45 hours of training coming in the door. Yeah. Before we talk to anybody. And then it's just more and more training that we go through. We're working with folks to safety plan with their children, with their pets, because those are barriers to getting out of an abusive relationship and finding resources sometimes. So just, letting people know that our services are free, they're confidential. They're not going to make you do anything that you don't want to do. Sometimes people feel like all we are is shelter, and that's not the case. We have lots of other services that we can help somebody even identify if their relationship is abusive. There might be things going on that they're not sure about. And so we can help them. I think just putting, like, again, going back to what I said earlier about creating a space where people know that you are a safe person and that you have information. So teachers, counselors, other caregivers, especially with youth, in some way creating a space that lets them know that I will help you, that this is a safe space. Because
you can also just ask them what they need. Like,
yeah.
What is it that I hear you, I believe you, this is not your fault. What is it that you need from me right now? Is it support? It might be just, I just need to tell somebody. I just needed to tell somebody. I've never told anybody. Or it might be, I need to find a safe place for my pet because I'm afraid, it might even be something specific that you can do to help.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a great believer in just asking, what is it that I can help you with? I mean, after I've listened, what is it that I can help you with right now? That could be powerful too, I think.
Yeah.
In addition to everything you said, Angela.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned that domestic violence services offers more than the shelter. I wonder, as we kind of start to wrap up this conversation, if for people to understand what other services, what are the services, the array of what is available for people, so that they know what what the options are. There's so much overlap between mental health and domestic violence. You mentioned the safety plan. We teach about safety planning with young people who are depressed or anxious or struggling with any kind of mental health diagnosis, to create a safety plan as part of their regular health care. It's important, and to know that that same technique is utilized in domestic violence is great, because then we can help those people in our lives who are our safe people to understand how to support us when a crisis is, when the time is right to make a big change, or when we need the help that we're seeking. So, what are the rest of the services?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
So, in addition to shelter, we're also working on building a stronger community counseling program. So, most victims don't need shelter. A lot do, but most don't. So, building a program where a victim could make a one-on-one appointment or join a support group, someone from the community, not just folks living in our safe house, I think is a big goal for us. We have those services available now, and we're working to build those services up so that there's more available. Our legal services are used by over 1,300 individuals a year. So the majority of survivors who use our services use legal services. And mostly it's to obtain a protection order, but also for assistance with divorce, emergency custody, emergency child support. So that's already a service that does a very high volume for DVS. And then we're adding on some housing services this year. We'll be able to do direct rapid rehousing, which means help survivors find a permanent place to live if homelessness is one of the things that they're dealing with. And also we're expanding our transitional housing. So transitional housing is we call it bridge house because it's a step between emergency shelter and being able to move on to permanent housing. So we'll be expanding those efforts as well. And then Angela can add anything that she'd like to add, and also what her group does, what her department does, which is the outreach and education work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We, safety planning is a big part of what we do. If they call the hotline, we can do the safety planning with them. As Christine said, most people don't need to be housed. And so we can talk with them about connecting to other resources, maybe even doing some case management with them to help them figure out what they need if they're trying to figure out if they want to leave or not. And if they do, how to do that safely, because that can make things a little more dangerous if they're trying to leave. And then as Christine mentioned, on the outreach and education side of things, that's what I have two people who work with me doing that. So Nancy's out in the schools and working with youth programs to talk with youth of all ages about healthy relationships, how to recognize unhealthy dynamics in relationships, talking with parents. Like, we cannot forget that parents need the information too. So being able to support parents and caregivers and adults in the community to, wrap around that support for youth in our community. Ariana is our medical systems advocate, and we are, making a concerted, dedicated effort to doing more outreach with medical systems. And that I'm kind of framing it as wellness. So it's any kind of system that our survivors might be connecting with, whether it's mental health, behavioral health, drug and alcohol, physical health, like all needs that they might have to be well, kind of falls under that umbrella. So that's a big one. And then, doing the systems work and working with housing. Christine and Jen do a lot of that work, working with law enforcement and prosecution and that whole spectrum of the system. So we're really out in the community to be able to provide education, training to professionals, so that teachers and coaches and other people who are working with youth and adults to be able to better understand what dating abuse and domestic violence might look like, how they can help, what the resources are. All of our services, including the training, is provided at no cost. So if somebody, workplaces and just developing workplace policies that are more supportive of victims and survivors and better understanding the dynamics, like having a more informed administrative function can help to support employees. And that's part of their wellness too, right? Helps to contribute to a more safe work environment for folks and knowing that they have the support if they need it. So any which way you look at it, like we'll come out and talk about it and help people to better understand the issue and connect the dots between whatever their specialty area is and our specialty area. And that's the theme that we've been using this year, is connecting the dots between domestic violence and our systems partners, and also helping people to better understand the needs of victims and survivors, and also those barriers that might keep them in those abusive relationships.
Thank you so much. So speaking of, connecting the dots, in our work in mental health, we are providing this Copay Assistance program. So, to connect between domestic violence and mental health, often access to mental health services is a big barrier, especially affordability for patients whose for income, they don't qualify for Medicaid. I would imagine one of the reasons why I asked the question earlier about demographics is that, Medicaid is a great resource for anyone who qualifies based on their income, but that can, victims fleeing a domestic violence situation could be eligible for Medicaid, but they might not be eligible immediately. And then furthermore, they may not be eligible, after the emergency shelter placement, the home. So we have, mental health copay assistance to support covering the cost of copays for patients. They can be anybody in the family can be the patient. So if a mother is looking for therapy for a child or children, or for themselves, they can apply through us for copay assistance, and it just reduces the cost of therapy to just $10 a session. And we have 40 or 50 different mental health providers here in Lancaster County who are participating with us. And, it's based on income, but it goes well above beyond what Medicaid will cover. So just wanted to put that out there as another resource that's available to people here in Lancaster County. We supported 122 youth and young people last year with copay assistance. And there's no limit. It's not like an employee assistance program with just 3 sessions. It can be as many sessions as needed. So that's
great.
Yeah. Other overlaps between mental health and domestic violence, anything that you want to mention that we didn't cover? The only thing I would say is that we often will stress the importance of, asking what happened and encouraging a child or a young person to know, when is appropriate to tell an adult and to talk to a grown-up about something that is concerning to them, whether that's a parent, a teacher, another safe person in their life that they know and trust. And, ideally that would be somebody who's a mandated reporter, but trying to encourage children to disclose to a teacher or parent something that's happening to them is really important. And that we as adults are those safe people in a child's life. So important.
Absolutely.
What else do you want to mention about mental health and domestic violence? Anything else that we didn't cover?
Well, so, young people age 14 and older would be able to access our services. We are mandated reporters, but we do fall under like those mental health services that they can do that independently, much like what you're supporting them with. So it can be a little tricky, but we do, our services are there for them. Well.
And similarly, we can help, teens 14 and older. Sometimes, if their parent or guardian is unwilling to help them get access to mental health care, we can help them enroll in Medicaid or help them get access to mental health care on their own.
I think that's a great service that you're providing. Yeah.
As challenging as that is, it's still really, really important, as well as providing and encouraging support for mental health services in schools. So school-based counseling, especially. It's great to increase access that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we didn't really talk about, and I didn't even mention it when we talked about our services, was the children's program that we operate in the Safe House. And this has been, that's run by Deb Manning, has been for years. This is unique. This is a unique program in terms of what most domestic violence safe houses or shelters are able to offer. But we really have a comprehensive, we struggled during the pandemic for lots of reasons, but things are sort of back up and running now. And we really do have a robust children's program in the Safe House where we acknowledge that the children, especially those living in the shelter, have already experienced trauma and domestic violence, that they're not just there with their mom until they find a new place to live. They need specialized attention and care and education and counseling in some cases. So I know that there's probably a pretty robust there can be and probably already is a pretty robust connection between the work that we're doing in the Safe House with children and young people and the resources that Touchstone Foundation provides and other community resources out there. But we really do have a pretty unique and robust is the only word I can keep thinking of. But that program is not the typical experience that I've seen in most domestic violence shelters. We made a decision a long time ago to focus on that. So I wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah. It's really much more than just childcare. Like, it's also working with the family and the parents if they want it to be able to talk about those unhealthy dynamics that might have been set up because of the abuse that was, when there's an abuser, they're at the center of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so just rewiring those patterns can be really helpful. So our children's program staff does a lot of work with parent support too, to help them better understand how their children might have been impacted and how to help them heal as well. So it's a family healing.
And I've been to the program. I've seen it. It's beautiful and amazing. And what's I think so impressive, even beyond what you're talking about, is that it's trauma informed.
Yes.
And it's closely aligned between what the mom or the parent is experiencing and what the children are learning. So there's alignment there as well, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So like the whole family is really kind of
the
learning. together along the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
The 2-gen approach.
Yeah.
The 2-gen.
So the one thing that I would also offer up to people is that, is just get to know the issue a little bit more. It can be as simple as following us on Facebook or other social media channels. It could be coming out to awareness events. DV Awareness Month is a big month for us, but we are out in the community at lots of other times as well. And so tonight is the last event that we're hosting for the month, our Speaking Witness program. It's bearing witness to the stories and experiences that survivors share with us. So we have 5 survivors who are lined up to share their stories tonight at the Ware Center at 7 p.m. And each one has, a unique experience to share with us. We can learn from them. We can show the support and the gratitude for them to be able to do that. So it could be showing up for an event. It could be, just knowing that our services are available to help somebody. It could be inviting us in to do a training or a workshop or have a conversation with your group. If you're part of a women's group, a church group, a PTO. Do they still have parent-teacher organizations? I don't know.
I check all those boxes. Yes.
Inviting us in for a conversation, to learn from each other and to talk about ways to, support the victims and survivors in our community. Getting your schools to invite us in for education, because some schools are hesitant to do that. I think they're afraid that if we come in and talk about the issue, then somehow it just magically now happens. It's already happening. They're just not, the students just aren't telling you about it because they don't know if you're a safe place or not.
Right.
Disclose that. So, inviting us into wherever your youth are to be able to talk about that. There's lots of different ways that people can get involved. We have a volunteer program if people really want to get hands-on with things. It can be coming out into the community. It can be working directly with adults or children, whatever their comfort level might be.
Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. And I know it's a busy month for both of you with domestic violence awareness. So I really appreciate your time today and the opportunity to have this conversation to really, again, raise awareness around the connecting the dots between mental health and domestic violence, because the more we know, the more we can help all those people who, families, kids, young people in our community here in Lancaster County who are victims, and we can be that support for them. The Speaking Witness event, we're going to celebrate those brave, courageous survivors who can share their story tonight at 7 at the Ware Center. So thanks again, both of you, for joining me today, and happy Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Thank you.
Weird, isn't it?